Hello, my name is T and welcome back to Filling the Void. Since I upload my videos every other Monday, I decided it would be a great idea to start off every video with a question of self-care. What have you done today to take care of yourself or your mental health? If the answer is nothing, then I challenge you to do something that makes you happy. Whether that's going for a walk, reading a poem, or just continuing on with this video, I want you to pause and do it. If you've satisfied my challenge, or even if you haven't, let's get right into it. This week we'll be diving into what I personally believe are some of the most important terms in post-colonial theory, the other and othering. If you went and read the definition of the other in the reference text, then you have probably noticed how convoluted post-colonial theory is. That's academia for you, but it's okay, that's why I'm here. In his journal article for International Encyclopedia of Human Geography, published in 2008, French geographer Jean-François Stazac defines other as a member of a dominated outgroup whose identity is considered lacking and who may be subject to discrimination by the in-group. For the definition of othering, Stazac says that othering is transforming a difference into an otherness so as to create an in-group and an out-group. According to post-colonial studies, the key concept, which I will be abbreviating to TKC from now on, the concept of the other came from Jacques Leçon. Taking from Freud and post-Freudian ideas of how subjectivity is created, Leçon made the distinction between the other, big O, and the other, little o. The concept of le grand autre, the great other as Leçon referred to it, is much of the basis of colonialism. I would even say it's the basis of all colonialism. The other as a classification depends heavily on a two-tiered hierarchical system, them versus us. The in-group is a group of people who have decided that their identity and their values are the perspective that the world should be understood through. This is the definition of ethnocentrism. The outgroup then becomes defined by highly stigmatized and usually oversimplified stereotypes created for them by the in-group. The in-group, thus, has created not only their own identity, but the identity of the outgroup based on their otherness. So, based off of what I've said previously, it seems as though any group can participate in othering. At its simplest understanding, that may be true, but in the context of post-colonialism, that isn't. All of this is heavily dependent on power. An in-group must have tangible power to enforce their ethnocentrism. They must have the power to impose their identity and delegitimize the identity of the outgroup, usually expressed through discriminatory measures. Example would be to create a false binary opposition between two concepts. This could be women being the other of men and black men being the other of white men. It is important to note that the opposites of these binaries cannot exist within the concept of the other, as women and black men do not have the power to other men and white men. It is important to note that outgroups, according to Stazac, cease to be others when they have successfully escaped the negative perceptions put upon them by the in-group. So I've spent a majority of this video basically spewing a theoretical word vomit, and I know you want to know what it means, or at least how to apply these concepts. Well, in her foreword to her premiere novel, the late and great Toni Morrison stated that when she was deciding what experience she wished to write about in The Bluest Eye, she wanted to portray the far more tragic and disabling consequences of accepting rejection as legitimate as self-evident. In this upcoming portion, I will be giving the synopsis of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. I want to reiterate the specific trigger warnings that were posted at the beginning of this video. The synopsis will include sexual violence, racism, the death of a child, and incest. For those of whom these are sensitive topics, I would advise to end the video now. I'll be continuing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Bluest Eye tells the story of a young girl named Pecola, a dark-skinned girl who, at the beginning of the novel, becomes a foster child of the McTeer family. Living in 1941 Lorain, Ohio, Pecola comes from a troubled background where her father is an unstable alcoholic who sexually abuses her, and where both parents participate in a verbally and physically volatile relationship. Outside of her home, Pecola is subject to the judging eyes of her neighbors and classmates, all who openly remind her of how ugly they perceive her to be. After an incident with a grocery store owner, Pecola wishes for blue eyes, believing that blue eyes are the source of all things good. The story is told through multiple character perspectives, including the two McTeer daughters, Claudia and Frida. One of the major conflicts of the story comes when Pecola becomes the victim of violent rape at the hands of her father, Choli. After a second incident, Pecola becomes pregnant. Claudia and Frida hope that the baby survives and superstitiously plant marigolds after being told that if they bloom, the baby will survive. They never bloom. After the death of her child, Pecola falls into insanity, unable to satisfy the world's view of what is beauty and unable to be happy due to her familial situation and the social standards for African Americans of the time. At the closing of the novel, Claudia McTeer states that she believes Pecola is not simply a victim of circumstance, but acted as the town's scapegoat to make themselves appear prettier and happier under the oppression that they were already forced to experience as Black people in America. There's much of the story that I actually had to skim over for this synopsis, but there are two major concepts from the book that I want to talk about through the perspective of the other. First is Black childhood. As I've previously quoted, Morrison wanted to tell a story that dealt with the consequences of racism, i.e., systemic othering, and how it affected people, specifically children. According to Morrison, they are invisible. The death of self-esteem can occur quickly, easily in children, before their ego has legs, so to speak. Couple the vulnerability of youth with indifferent parents, dismissive adults, and a world which in its language, laws, and images reinforces despair, and the journey to destruction is sealed. For people of color, the concept of who we are to society develops alongside our realization that there is a version of ourselves that exists outside of ourselves. That is, our concept of the other, big O, is developed in tandem with our concept of the other, little o. Pecola becomes the embodiment of this concept. As she is becoming aware of herself being perceived by those around her, with her neighborhood insisting that she is an ugly girl, she is realizing that this idea is justified by her place in society as a Black person. To combat this, Pecola creates a seemingly tangible goal of gaining blue eyes to give hope that she can combat these negative conceptions of her identity. Pecola's disdain for her identity, both racial and personal, is only emphasized by the violence she is forced to experience at the hands of her father and the dysfunction she is witness to between her parents, both African American. Pecola also experiences alienation often, with one notable experience being where the white immigrant owner of the grocery store, Mr. Jakubowski, refuses to touch her hand when Pecola goes to buy some Mary Janes, a type of candy, in Chapter 3. She is forced to experience a sense of shame for her identity, and in turn decides that the blonde-haired, blue-eyed candy mascot, Mary Jane, is beautiful. Pecola has decided that how people view her create what she sees. Therefore, her ugliness is the reason for the ugliness she is forced to experience in her life. This leads me to the next topic, internalized racism. Throughout the Bluest Eye, multiple Black characters have internalized the negative perceptions forced onto them by the society that they exist in. Geraldine, a socially conscious upper-class Black woman, participates in prejudice against her own community, believing she is better than those like Pecola and her family. To Geraldine, her class allows her to remain above traditional Black stereotypes, yet, by doing so, forces those stereotypes onto those poorer than her. These two major conflicts within the story depend heavily on the character's understanding of le grand autre. Pecola is not simply a victim of racism and internalized racism, but she is the perfect embodiment of her community's search for acceptance in a world that does not understand or chooses not to understand their identities. She also embodies the lengths that her community are willing to take to gain this acceptance and to be accepted by their in-group, i.e. white people. By excluding Pecola because of her distance from Eurocentric beauty standards, they reaffirm the idea that she experiences bad things because she is not good looking. Thus, when Pecola's identity changes after the death of her child, she believes that she has gained her greatest wish, blue eyes, when in actuality, the change is that her community has begun to pity her. In the end, racism and violent circumstances have taken an irreversible toll on Pecola's sense of self and also her sense of sanity. Though the novel may seem like an exaggeration of the implications of the post-colonial concept of the other, what Pecola had to experience throughout the novel is not that far off from the real-life consequences of racism that Black youth have to experience throughout their lives. To end this video, I want to ask that if you have the capability, that you go and donate to the I Believe in Black Youth Leadership Fund. Supporting communities of color, especially Black youth, is the first step to breaking down these negative perceptions that Black youth or youth of color may have about themselves. A link to the GoFundMe can be found in the description box below. With that, we've reached the end of the video. I hope you have learned something today and that you have an amazing week. See you next time.